The Galactic Council chamber was filled with strange sounds and smells that would make any human feel uncomfortable. Ambassador Daniel Carter stood in the center of the massive room, while hundreds of alien eyes watched his every move. The ceiling stretched so high above him that he could barely see where it ended. Beside him sat Max, a German shepherd whose brown and black fur had been brushed until it shined under the bright lights. The dog sat perfectly still with his ears up and alert, watching the aliens just as carefully as they watched him. Counselor Vexthor was a Krillian, which meant his body was covered in hard plates that looked like armor made of bone. When he moved, those plates clicked together, making a sound like someone tapping rocks. He leaned forward in his seat and stared down at Daniel and Max with eyes that reminded Daniel of an insect. There was something in the way Vexthor looked at them that made Daniel's jaw tighten. It was the look someone gives when they think they are better than you. The counselor spoke, and his words came out through a translation device that made his voice sound flat and emotionless. He asked Daniel why he had brought a predator into the council halls. He said the word predator like it was something dirty. Daniel took a slow breath before answering. He explained that Max was his service animal and his registered diplomatic companion. He said Max posed no threat to anyone in the chamber. His voice was calm and professional, even though he wanted to say much more. From the Zorvathi section of the chamber came a sound like water bubbling through pipes. It took Daniel a moment to realize they were laughing. Delegate Shira moved forward, and her body rippled in a way that made Daniel think of an octopus. She had tentacles instead of arms, and her skin kept changing colors as she spoke. She said that humans kept carnivores in their homes and fed them, and gave them shelter and even called them family. She asked Daniel if he also made friends with the bacteria in his stomach. The way she said it made it clear she thought the whole idea was ridiculous. The chamber exploded with noise. Aliens of every shape and size were making sounds that Daniel's translator told him were laughter. Even the Dracorians, who usually kept their faces blank, seemed amused. Daniel felt heat rising in his face, but he kept his expression neutral. Max shifted slightly beside him, and Daniel dropped his hand to rest on the dog's head. The familiar feel of soft fur under his fingers helped him stay calm. Captain Lisa Morgan watched everything from the observation deck high above the main floor. Her hands gripped the railing so hard her knuckles turned white. Standing beside her was Commander Greg Phillips, who shook his head slowly. He said quietly that the aliens did not understand. They had never lived on a planet where working together with other species meant the difference between dying out or building a civilization. Lisa nodded but did not take her eyes off Daniel and Max below. Daniel waited until the laughter died down before he spoke again. He said that perhaps the council would benefit from learning about the history between humans and dogs. He said it was a partnership that went back more than 30,000 years. Before he could say more, Vexthor interrupted him. The counselor asked if Daniel meant 30,000 years of enslaving another species. His tone suggested he already knew the answer and found it disgusting. Daniel's voice became firmer when he corrected the counselor. He said it was not slavery but partnership. He explained that dogs chose humans just as much as humans chose dogs. Over thousands of years, dogs learned to read human faces and understand human emotions better than almost any other creature. Humans learned to trust dogs with their lives, with their children, with their homes. It was not about one species controlling another. It was about two species deciding they were stronger together than apart. Delegate Shira's tentacles waved in a pattern that Daniel's translator said meant dismissal. She said that the council was made up of advanced civilizations, and they had no need for such primitive attachments. She explained that their security systems could scan things at the molecular level. Their companions were artificial intelligences designed to give them exactly what they needed. She said that dogs were relics from a less sophisticated age. The way she said sophisticated made it sound like she was calling humans stupid without actually using the word. Daniel wanted to argue more. He wanted to make them understand that what humans had with dogs was special and important, but he could see that their minds were already made up. To them, humanity was young and primitive. The bond between humans and dogs was just another strange thing to tolerate, something to add to their files as proof that humans were not as advanced as the other species. He had learned in his years as a diplomat that some battles could not be won with words. Sometimes you had to wait and let actions speak for themselves. He executed a small bow, which was the polite way to show respect to the council, even when you disagreed with them. He said that he understood their position, but requested that Max be allowed to remain with him as human diplomatic protocols required. He reminded them that Max was a registered service animal. The council members talked among themselves for a few moments. Their conversation sounded like a mix of clicks, whistles, and sounds that Daniel's translator could not identify. Finally, Vexthor spoke again. He said the request was granted, but made it clear he thought it was an unnecessary accommodation. Then he dismissed Daniel with a wave of his plated hand. Daniel turned and walked toward the exit with Max at his side. The dog pressed close to Daniel's leg in a way that offered comfort. Without thinking, Daniel's hand moved to scratch behind Max's ears. It was something he had done thousands of times before. The action was automatic and soothing for both of them. It reminded Daniel that no matter what the council thought, he knew the truth about dogs. Lisa and Greg were waiting outside the chamber when Daniel and Max emerged. Lisa's expression was dry and knowing. She said that the meeting went about as well as they had expected. Daniel agreed and said the council members thought humans were primitives playing with dangerous animals. He said they could not imagine that these so-called dangerous animals had saved countless human lives throughout history. Dogs had guided blind people, comforted traumatized soldiers, protected children, and done 100 other jobs. And they had done all of it asking for nothing but food and shelter and love in return. Greg suggested that they give the aliens time and said they would learn eventually. Daniel looked down at Max, whose tail wagged slowly back and forth. The dog looked up at his human with dark eyes full of trust and loyalty. Daniel said quietly that he hoped the aliens would never have to learn the hard way. But somewhere deep inside, he had a feeling that hope might not come true. 3 months had passed since Daniel stood before the council and listened to them laugh at humanity's bond with dogs. Now Captain Lisa Morgan stood on the bridge of the Earth vessel Endeavour and watched through the main viewport as a massive ice planet grew larger. The planet was called Kepler 442c, and it looked like a giant ball of frozen blue and white gases. Orbiting that planet was one of humanity's newest stations, a place called Station Halifax, where scientists and miners worked at the edge of explored space. Lieutenant Kevin Barnes sat at the navigation console, and his fingers moved across the controls with practiced ease. He reported that they were approaching docking range and that Station Halifax was asking for their identification codes. Lisa ordered him to send their clearance and told someone to let Danny know it was time to get ready. Down in the cargo bay, Daniel was already checking his gear for the 3rd time. Max stood patiently while Daniel inspected the dog's environmental suit. The suit was custom-made to protect Max from the station's atmosphere, which sometimes had problems. The helmet was clear so Max could see everything around him, even though the suit made him look bulky and awkward. Daniel tested the seal on Max's helmet one more time and told the dog he looked good. He said it was just another inspection tour, and that it would be an easy day. Max's tail wagged inside the suit, making the whole thing shift slightly. The Endeavour docked with Station Halifax smoothly, and Daniel led Max through the airlock into the station. Waiting for them was Commander Paul Henderson, who ran the station. Paul was a man whose face showed the tiredness of someone who had been working too hard for too long. He smiled when he saw Daniel, but the smile did not reach his eyes. Paul said he was surprised to see a diplomatic visit because everything at the station was running smoothly. Daniel assured him it was just a routine inspection. He explained that the council wanted to make sure all frontier stations were following proper safety protocols. What Daniel did not say was that Station Halifax had complained 3 times about Krillian trade ships coming into their space without permission. The council claimed they were looking into it, but Daniel suspected this. Inspection was more about making it look like they cared than actually caring. Paul led them through the station's main corridor, and as they walked, Daniel could see how small the place really was. Only 43 people lived and worked here. The crew quarters were cramped, and the rooms where people spent their free time were tiny. These were people who had volunteered to live in isolation, drawn by good pay and the promise of being part of something historic. They walked past windows that showed the ice planet below and storage rooms filled with equipment and supplies. Suddenly, Max's head snapped to the left, and his entire body went rigid. A low growl came from deep in his chest. The sound was barely audible through his helmet, but Daniel heard it and stopped walking immediately. He asked Paul if Section D was supposed to have anyone in it. Paul frowned and said no, that section was just cargo storage and nothing was scheduled to be there. Before he could say anything else, the explosion happened. The corridor buckled and twisted, and Daniel felt himself thrown against the wall. His magnetic boots were the only thing that kept him from tumbling through the air in the reduced gravity. Alarms began shrieking throughout the station, and red emergency lights came on, casting everything in a bloody glow. Someone shouted over the intercom that there was a hull breach in Section D, and that they had intruders. The voice said there were multiple hostiles, but the transmission cut off in a burst of static before they could say more. Paul was already talking into his communicator, and his face had gone pale. He announced to the entire station that all personnel needed to go to emergency stations, and that all sections needed to be sealed. He said it was not a drill, and his voice was tight with fear. Daniel's mind raced as he tried to understand what was happening. Intruders on a frontier station could only mean pirates. The Krillian Syndicate had been getting bolder lately, attacking human installations on the edge of space to steal valuable minerals and equipment. But attacking a station that had a diplomatic vessel docked was an act of war, unless the pirates did not know the Endeavor was here. Or even worse, unless they knew and simply did not care. Paul said they needed to get to the command center and started moving quickly. He said that if the pirates were after the quantum cores, they would head to engineering right after they secured the station. Max barked sharply and then lunged forward, pulling hard against his leash. Daniel commanded the dog to heel, but Max was insistent, straining toward a side corridor. Then Daniel heard it, and his blood went cold. It was a child screaming, and then the sound cut off abruptly. Paul's face went white, and he said the residential section. He said, "Oh God," and that there were families living on the station. Daniel made a decision in a split second. He told Paul to go to the command center and get the Endeavor engaged in the fight. He said he would get the civilians to safety. Paul started to argue and said that Daniel could not go alone, but Daniel said it was an order and told him to go. Paul hesitated for only a moment before he turned and ran toward the command center. Daniel released Max's leash and followed the dog as he raced down the corridor. They moved quickly through the red-lit hallways and soon found the first body. It was a station technician named Claire Peterson, and her face was frozen in an expression of shock. There was a plasma burn through her chest that had killed her instantly. Daniel forced himself to look away and keep moving because there was nothing he could do for her now. Max led him to Residential Unit 7, and Daniel looked through the small window in the door. Inside he could see a Krillian raider wearing chitinous armor that gleamed in the emergency lighting. The alien held a woman by the throat, and Daniel recognized her from the crew manifest as Amy Foster. Two small children were hiding behind an overturned table, and their faces were wet with tears. Amy's face was turning purple and her legs kicked weakly as she fought for air. Daniel had no weapon because station regulations did not allow firearms in residential areas. He had left his sidearm back on the Endeavor because he never thought he would need it for a simple inspection. All he had was his training, his quick thinking, and a 70-pound German Shepherd whose loyalty was about to be tested in the most extreme way possible. He took a deep breath and reached for the door control. His hand was steady even though his heart was pounding. He opened the door and stepped inside. The Krillian raider turned when it heard the door open, and its compound eyes reflected the red emergency lights like hundreds of tiny mirrors. Amy Foster hung in its grip, and her face had turned a deep purple color. Her legs kicked weakly as she struggled to breathe. The alien's mandibles clicked together in a way that might have been laughter or amusement. The sound was mechanical and cold. The raider spoke, and its translator made the words come out flat and emotionless. It said that a human diplomat was convenient and that Daniel would make excellent leverage. Daniel raised his hands slowly and kept them where the raider could see them. His heart was hammering so hard in his chest that he could hear his own pulse in his ears. He told the raider to let Amy go and said it could take him instead. He tried to keep his voice calm and steady even though fear was making his hands want to shake. The Krillian said it would take both Daniel and Amy. It said it would take the children too because humans paid very well to get their young ones back. Its grip tightened on Amy's throat and she made a choking sound that was horrible to hear. Behind Daniel, Max had gone completely still. There was no growl, no bark, no sound at all. The dog's entire body was coiled tight like a spring that was ready to release. Every muscle was tensed and waiting. Daniel had trained with Max for 5 years and he knew the dog better than he knew most people. He could read Max's body language and understand his moods and capabilities. Right now, Max was not acting like a pet or a companion. He was acting like a predator who was calculating angles and looking for weaknesses. 30,000 years of evolutionary programming had turned wolves into dogs, but underneath the friendly exterior, That ancient predator was still there waiting. Daniel took a step forward and spoke carefully. He told the raider to listen to him and said it needed to release Amy and leave the station. He said that if the raider hurt her or hurt the children, he was going to let his dog off the leash. His voice was quiet, but there was something in it that made the threat real. The Krillian actually laughed, and the sound was like rocks grinding together. It said that Daniel's pet was nothing to worry about. It said that Krillian armor could withstand plasma fire, and asked what a soft little animal could possibly do. Daniel gave the raider one last chance. He said it in a way that made it clear this was the final warning. The Krillian called him pathetic and raised its free hand. A plasma weapon began charging with a sound that made Daniel's stomach clench. The raider said it would kill Amy first, then the children, then Daniel, and finally the useless dog. But it never got to finish the sentence. Daniel said 2 words. He said Max and protect. The transformation was instant. Max launched himself forward with explosive force. 70 pounds of muscle and controlled fury propelled by legs that could reach speeds of 45 miles per hour in short bursts. The Krillian tried to track the movement and tried to bring its weapon around, but Max was already inside its guard. The dog moved faster than the alien expected. Max's jaws clamped onto the joint where the raider's arm connected to its shoulder. It was the only gap in the chitinous armor. Krillians had exoskeletons that were designed for their high-gravity homeworld, and the armor was nearly impossible to penetrate from the outside. But joints needed flexibility to work, and flexibility meant weakness. Max's bite force was over 300 pounds per square inch, and he found that weakness with deadly accuracy. The Krillian shrieked, and the sound was like nothing Daniel had ever heard before. It dropped Amy as it tried to shake Max off. The dog held on and worried at the joint like his wolf ancestors had brought down prey on ancient frozen plains. Purple blood sprayed across the floor and walls. Daniel dove forward and caught Amy before she could hit the ground. He shouted at her to get the kids and run. He told her to find Commander Henderson. Amy did not hesitate or ask questions. She scooped up both children and ran out of the room. The sound of their footsteps and crying faded down the corridor. The Krillian finally managed to grab Max with its uninjured arm. It threw the dog against the wall with tremendous force. Max hit hard and let out a yelp of pain, but he recovered almost instantly. He circled around looking for another opening, and his eyes were focused and calculating. The raider raised its plasma weapon and said that Daniel dared to attack it. Its voice was filled with rage and pain. Daniel grabbed a chair and swung it with everything he had. The furniture shattered against the Krillian's head. It did no real damage, but it broke the alien's aim. The plasma bolt scorched the ceiling instead of turning Max into ash. Max attacked again, and this time he went for the raider's legs. The armor was thinner there because it was designed for mobility rather than maximum protection. The dog's teeth found purchase and tore through the weaker plating. Lisa Morgan's voice suddenly boomed through the station's intercom system. She announced that this was the Endeavor and that they had engaged the hostile vessels. She told Station Halifax to hold position and said that Marines were on their way. The message changed everything. The Krillian realized that its quick raid had turned into something much more dangerous. Human warships were responding, and the raider was injured and bleeding. It was facing a diplomat and a dog that had already proven far more dangerous than anyone expected. The raider made a decision that Daniel recognized immediately. It was choosing to retreat. The alien pulled a small device from its belt and slapped it against the wall. Daniel knew what it was even before his mind had time to process the information. It was a shaped charge, strong enough to blow through the hull and create a vacuum that would let the raider escape while the humans dealt with explosive decompression. Daniel had maybe 3 seconds to act. He shouted for Max to come, and the dog instantly stopped attacking and raced to Daniel's side. Daniel slammed his hand against the emergency seal button for the room's inner door. The reinforced barrier dropped from the ceiling just as the shaped charge detonated. The explosion was deafening even through the sealed door. New alarms joined the ones already screaming, and Daniel felt the air pressure drop as the room vented into space. The wounded Krillian was sucked out through the breach and into the void. Daniel slid down the wall as his legs suddenly felt weak. The adrenaline that had kept him moving was giving way to shaking hands and rapid breathing. Max pressed against him and whined as he checked his human for injuries. The dog had a gash along his side where he had hit the wall, and his environmental suit was torn in places, but he was alive and still moving. Daniel's voice cracked when he spoke. He told Max he was a good boy and repeated it several times. Through the station's windows, Daniel could see the Endeavor engaging two Krillian raider ships. Railgun fire created bright lines of light across the darkness of space. More human ships were arriving, jumping into the system to answer the distress call. The pirates had made a terrible mistake. They thought a small frontier station would be easy to attack and rob. They did not know that a diplomatic vessel would be docked there. They certainly never imagined that a single dog would be the difference between success and failure. The Galactic Council met again 48 hours after the attack on Station Halifax, and the tension in the chamber was thick enough to cut with a knife. Human delegates sat on one side, while Krillian representatives sat on the other, and between them was a space that felt like a battlefield. Other alien species watched with expressions that ranged from concern to curiosity, to careful neutrality. Everyone knew that what happened in this chamber today would shape relationships between species for years to come. Daniel stood before the council once more, but this time Max was different. The dog's injuries had been treated by the best veterinary doctors on the Endeavor, but something had changed in him. Max was no longer calm and relaxed. He sat at attention with his ears up and his eyes constantly scanning the chamber for threats. The events at Halifax had awakened something primal in both of them, and neither would forget what had happened in that residential. Unit. Counselor Vexthor spoke first, and his plates were flushed dark with what Daniel had learned was agitation or anger. The Krillian insisted that the attack was unauthorized and said it was done by a criminal element within Krillian space. He said the Krillian government condemned the attack completely. His voice tried to sound sincere, but there was something hollow about the words. Lisa Morgan stepped forward before anyone else could speak. She had been granted permission to address the council as the commanding officer, who responded to the attack. She said those were not pirates, and her voice was cold and sharp. She said they were former Krillian military using military-grade equipment, and that the Endeavor had recovered the bodies. The way she said it made it clear she had evidence that could not be disputed. Vexthor tried to deflect and said they must have been mercenaries or criminals who stole military equipment. But Lisa cut him off again. She said the raiders had active military transponders and that their mission was very specific. They were there to capture human civilians for ransom and steal quantum core technology. She said this was a sanctioned operation that went wrong when the Krillians realized a diplomatic vessel was present. Her words hung in the air like an accusation that could not be taken back. The chamber erupted into chaos. Human delegates demanded justice while Krillian representatives tried to deny everything. Other species attempted to mediate, but it was clear they did not know who to believe or what to do. Voices overlapped in dozens of languages, and the translation devices struggled to keep up. Daniel stood quietly in the center of it all and waited. He had learned that sometimes silence was more powerful than shouting. When the noise finally died down, Daniel spoke. His voice was not loud, but somehow it carried through the entire chamber. He said he was not there to debate politics, and that he was there to tell them what happened in Residential Unit 7. Every alien in the room turned to look at him. The chamber became so quiet that Daniel could hear the hum of the environmental systems. Daniel described how a Krillian raider had Amy Foster by the throat and how two children were seconds away from being kidnapped. He said he had no weapon, no armor, and no backup. According to every tactical analysis, he should have died, and Amy and her children should have been taken. He reached down and his hand found Max's head. The familiar gesture was automatic and comforting. He said that he had his dog. Delegate Shira interrupted, and her tentacles made a dismissive gesture. She said they were discussing matters of interstellar security and asked that they not waste time talking about pets. But Daniel repeated himself more firmly. He said his dog engaged a fully armored Krillian raider. He said 70 pounds fought against 200 pounds. He said Max had no weapons except his teeth and no armor except his skin, and he won. Vexthor said it was impossible. He said Krillian combat armor was rated for extreme conditions and heavy weapons fire. But Daniel interrupted him this time. He said the armor was rated for external threats, but not for an opponent smart enough to target the joints. He explained that Max identified the weak points in under 2 seconds and exploited them. The dog adapted when thrown and reassessed the situation and attacked again. Max did not hesitate when the raider drew a weapon. He trusted Daniel to protect him while he protected the civilians. Daniel pulled up a holographic display that showed security footage from the residential unit. The council watched in complete silence as Max launched himself at the Krillian raider. They saw his jaws find the vulnerable points in the armor. They watched as he refused to let go even when he was thrown against the wall and injured. The footage was brutal and beautiful at the same time. It showed the reality of what happened when you threatened someone a dog loved. Daniel's voice was quiet when he spoke again, but every word carried weight. He said this was what the council mocked, this bond that they dismissed as primitive. He said humans bred dogs not to be weapons but to be partners. Humans taught dogs to trust them. And in return, the dogs learned to read human intentions better than most sentient species could read their own kind. He gestured toward Max, who sat calmly despite his injuries. He said Max did not fight because he was programmed like a machine. Max fought because he understood that Amy Foster and her children were part of his pack. Daniel said that was not slavery or domination. That was family. The word hung in the air, and for a long moment nobody spoke. Finally, an old Dracorian named Kothrex broke the silence. His voice carried the weight of someone who had lived for centuries and seen many things. Kothrex said he had encountered many species in his long lifetime and had seen many forms of companionship and many types of bonds. But he admitted that he did not understand humans and their dogs until this moment. He looked directly at Vexthor and said the Krillian aggression at Station Halifax was unacceptable. But he also said that perhaps equally concerning was how badly the Council had underestimated humanity's capabilities. Delegate Shira asked if they were being told to fear humans because they had dogs. She sounded incredulous, but Kothrex corrected her and said they should pay attention because humans had each other. He told the Council to look at the footage again and really watch. The human and the dog moved as one unit. There were no commands, no hesitation. The dog knew what the human needed, and the human trusted the dog completely. They functioned as a single entity that was far more dangerous than either would be alone. Commander Greg Phillips stepped forward and asked permission to address the Council. When it was granted, he spoke with calm authority. He said that the Council needed to understand something fundamental about humanity. Humans did not conquer Earth because they were the strongest or fastest or most intelligent species. They survived because they cooperated. They formed bonds across species lines when that should have been impossible. They partnered with wolves and turned them into dogs. They domesticated horses and cats and birds and dozens of other animals. He paused and made eye contact with each council member in turn. He said the council saw primitive attachments, but humans saw their greatest strength. And if the Krillians or anyone else thought they could target human civilians without consequences, they should know something important. Humanity did not just have the Endeavor and the fleet. They had 500 million dogs on Earth and throughout the colonies. 500 million animals bred for 30,000 years to protect their humans. Vexthor demanded to know if that was a threat. Lisa Morgan answered simply that it was a fact and fair warning. Her voice carried no anger or aggression. She was simply stating the truth and letting the council decide what to do with that information. The investigation into the Station Halifax incident took 3 weeks, and during that time, the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Teams of investigators from multiple species examined every piece of evidence and interviewed every witness. When the final report was released, there was no room for doubt or denial. The Krillian government had authorized the raid because they believed humanity's frontier stations were vulnerable targets that could be attacked without real consequences. The presence of the Endeavor and Max's unexpected effectiveness had turned what should have been a quick strike into a diplomatic disaster that the Krillian Empire would not soon forget. Sanctions were imposed on the Krillian government, and they were harsh enough to sting. Reparations were paid to the families who lost loved ones at Station Halifax. 3 high-ranking Krillian officials were removed from the council in disgrace. But the real change was more subtle and harder to measure. It was in the way aliens looked at humans now, in the questions they asked, in the respect that crept into voices that had previously held only mockery. Daniel noticed the change first when he returned to the council for regular diplomatic duties. Alien delegates who had laughed at him and Max just months ago now watched the dog with something that looked like respect or perhaps even admiration. The Dracorians who prided themselves on their ancient warrior culture requested detailed information about human-animal husbandry practices. The Zorvadi, who had mocked the human-canine bond so thoroughly, now asked for data on canine psychology and training methods. Even the proud Phoenixians, who had remained neutral during the crisis, sent official inquiries about establishing their own companion animal programs. Lisa found Daniel in the council's observation garden one afternoon and commented on the situation. She said he had started a trend and there was amusement in her voice. Below them in the garden, Max was being fed treats by a Yutani delegate who had previously refused to be in the same room as the dog. The small alien's three-fingered hands were gentle as they offered Max something that looked like dried fruit. Max accepted the treats politely and his tail wagged in a slow, friendly rhythm. Daniel admitted that he had not meant to start anything. He said he just wanted the aliens to understand what dogs meant to humans. Lisa told him that they understood now and that understanding had consequences. She explained that the council had received formal proposals from 4 different species who wanted to begin experimental companion animal programs. The Dracorians wanted to domesticate something called a cliff runner from their homeworld. Apparently they had been trying to hunt these creatures to extinction for centuries, but now they were wondering if partnership might work better than extermination. Daniel smiled as he watched Max charm the Yutani delegate. The dog had always been good with people, and apparently that extended to aliens as well. Lisa continued and said that the Krillians were still angry about what happened. They had lost face over the incident and their pride was wounded. But the other species were curious and maybe even a little envious. Daniel asked what they were envious of. Lisa paused before answering and said they were envious of what Daniel had with Max, of that bond that went deeper than words or logic. She told him that Commander Henderson had sent a message from Station Halifax. Amy Foster wanted to adopt a dog, and so did 6 other families on the station. They had put in formal requests for puppies from the next breeding program. Daniel noted that the waiting list for those dogs was already long. German Shepherds suitable for space duty were in high demand, and carefully bred for the right temperament and intelligence. Lisa agreed, but said that according to the families, the wait would be worth it. She looked at Daniel seriously and said that he knew this changed things for humanity. They were not just the new species on the galactic stage anymore. They were the species that brought predators into their homes and called them family. They were the ones who turned potential enemies into loyal partners. Daniel said that humans had been doing it for 30,000 years, and that it was about time the galaxy caught up. A chime sounded through the garden, indicating that the council session was about to resume. Daniel stood and brushed off his uniform. Max immediately came to his side, leaving the Yutani delegate looking slightly disappointed. The 3 of them headed toward the council chamber, and behind them the alien watched them go with an expression that was hard to read, but might have been longing. Inside the council chamber, the topic of discussion was establishing clear protocols for frontier station security. The Krillian delegation was noticeably smaller than before, and those who remained kept their heads down and spoke little. Humanity's proposals were being taken seriously now and implemented with minimal debate. It was a stark change from the mockery and dismissal Daniel had faced just months ago. During a break in the proceedings, Counselor Cothrex approached Daniel privately. The elderly Dracorian moved slowly but with dignity. He said he wished to apologize, and his voice carried genuine regret. When Daniel first brought Max to the council chambers, Cothrex had considered it a curiosity at best and a diplomatic eccentricity at worst. He admitted that he did not understand what he was seeing. Daniel replied diplomatically that few people understood at first. But Cothrex said he understood now. He looked at Max with thoughtful eyes and said he had read human history. He learned how dogs guided blind humans and protected their young and rescued wounded soldiers from battlefields. How they sat with dying people and comforted those who grieved and asked for nothing but affection in return. The old Dracorian's voice became softer and more contemplative. He said his species thought they were advanced because they built artificial intelligences to meet their emotional needs. They designed companions to be perfect and optimized and ideal, but they missed something fundamental in their pursuit of perfection. Daniel asked what that was. Cothrex said the answer was choice. Human dogs chose to love humans. They could run away or reject training or turn violent, but they did not because the bond was real and genuine. The AI companions that other species used had no choice because they were programmed. There was no actual relationship, just sophisticated mimicry of one. The difference was profound once you understood it. Daniel felt emotion tighten his throat. He asked if Cothrex truly understood now. The Dracorian said he was beginning to, and then asked a question. He wanted to know what Max thought of all this, of the council sessions and politics and attention. Daniel smiled and reached down to scratch behind Max's ears. He said honestly that Max probably just wanted to go for a walk and maybe chase a ball, and then sleep on a comfortable bed. Dogs were not complicated creatures. They wanted to be near their people and have a purpose and be loved. Everything else was just details. Kothrex repeated the phrase about profound simplicity. He said that perhaps in their advancement, the older species had lost something important. They had forgotten that sometimes the most important bonds were the simplest ones. The council session resumed and Daniel took his seat with Max settling at his feet. As debates swirled about treaties and trade agreements, the dog's presence was no longer remarkable. He had become simply part of the landscape, accepted and normal. But Daniel noticed that delegates still glanced at Max occasionally. Their alien faces showed expressions that his translator could not fully interpret, but that looked like thoughtfulness or wonder. Seeds had been planted in fertile ground. Ideas had taken root. The galaxy was beginning to understand what humanity had known for 30,000 years. Having someone who would face impossible odds to protect you, who would fight armored raiders with nothing but teeth and loyalty, who would stand between you and danger without a moment of hesitation, that was not a weakness or a primitive attachment. It was the greatest strength any species could possess. And it all started with a simple choice made by wolves around ancient human campfires, the choice to stop being enemies and become family instead. As the session ended and Daniel stood to leave, Max stretched and yawned. The dog was completely unaware that he had helped reshape galactic understanding of the human species. To Max, he had simply done what dogs had been doing forever. He protected his human when it mattered most. Daniel led him out of the chamber with his hand resting on the dog's head. Behind them, Counselor Kothrex watched them go and thought about cliff runners and choices and the possibility that advancement and wisdom might not always be the same thing. The galaxy was changing one dog at a time, and perhaps that was exactly how it should be.